Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So today we're going to continue series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and I got a fun and different video for you guys this evening because we're going to be talking about the Aleck 64, not the Nintendo 64. And if you're not familiar with what that is, Nintendo allowed the Sega Corporation to take the Nintendo 64 hardware, put a JAMA Edge on the outside of it, and turn it into an arcade board. Now, not a ton of games have been released for it, but all of these games that I'm showing you on this video are the arcade versions made to run on the Nintendo 64 core. And we're starting off with Star Soldier because that is hands down the best game on the Aleck 64. And it's one of those things, it was odd that the Nintendo 64 hardware ended up in arcades. It's more odd the library of games that it got. It was a lot of Mahjong games with a couple traditional puzzle games, one shmup, and Vivid Dolls. And if you don't know what that is, I'm going to only show you about 20 seconds of that at the end of the video. It's about all I could get away with. But Star Soldier Vanishing Earth here is just an absolutely amazing shmup. If you're going to have one shmup on an arcade board made out of Nintendo 64 hardware, you could do a lot worse than this. This is the arcade hardware variant. It's running the ROM that would go on the Aleck 64, but it's still within the Nintendo 64 MiSTer FPGA core. And I will say that this did come out as a retail release for the Nintendo 64 as well, but that version does have some differences, and if you want right off the bat a very hard shmup-like experience, you want to go with the Aleck 64 ROM. And I'll let you know when I move over to the Nintendo 64 version as well. But this is just an awesome game, and it's so much fun to have these versions playable on the MiSTer core, because trust me, finding an Aleck 64 is not an easy task. Finding the games for it even harder, and you definitely need to bring your wallet if you want to do so. But all of these bullets on screen at once are so much fun. But if you move over to the Nintendo 64 version, at least at its stock settings, the ships barely even shoot at you for the first couple of levels. It is the biggest discrepancy in difficulty I have ever seen. You're going to see here, the ships are just blowing up at the edge of the screen, and not a single projectile has come anywhere near me. I would literally have to go into the ships themselves to get hit, versus the Aleck 64 version here, which is going to give you a lot more challenge right up front. I just prefer this version. Yes, you can go to the options menu for the Nintendo 64 variant and change up the difficulty, but right off the top, it's just fun to be able to play an arcade ROM on the Nintendo 64 FPGA core, and that's the reason alone is that I recommend you play this game. The great part is, though, it's just such a fun shmup. I love the 3D in this. Kind of feels a little bit like that pseudo forced perspective of a 2.5D game, but it just works. I love all these system error messages as well, and all the different transparencies you're going to see in the game. And that's the fun part about something like this, moving back over to Nintendo 64 footage. It is unique and it is different. Now, I know nobody has probably played Tobey Polystars that watches these videos. That was on the 3DO M2 arcade board, but this game feels very identical to that, except it's not a shoot 'em up, it's a space shoot 'em up. But honestly, it's just so much fun to be able to even talk about stuff like Aleck 64 on the channel, because outside of having original hardware, the only other way you can play these games is with an EverDrive on your Nintendo 64, so having them here in this core is awesome. Now, the hidden gem in my opinion is going to be Kuro Kuro Fever. It's basically Tetris meets Puyo Puyo Fever with some added mechanics that actually deepen the complexity of the game. But right off the top, I absolutely love the art style. It is weird, it's colorful, it's cute, and it does it for me with all the pastel colorways you're going to see in the video. But honestly, of all the games that run on the Aleck 64, this one is my favorite, and that's only because Star Soldier is also available on the Nintendo 64. It is a very simple game, just like Tetris or Puyo Puyo. Match the tiles to get 4 in a row. But you're going to see that we have those grapes flashing in blue down below, and those are going to be a gigantic mechanic, because if you combine 4 of those together, the rabbits are going to jump down and eat them, and the screen is going to start flipping around. You can set up different victory conditions depending on where you leave those panels. You want to have enough on screen at once, so when the screen flips, you start eliminating more of those panels and sending more junk over to your opponent's screen. You'll see there as it rotated down, 3 matched, and that was able to give me a 2 chain. The more you chain up in this game, the better it's going to go. Watch what happens right here. It's going to just get absolutely ridiculous. But this game also has such a cute and charming soundtrack. You're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. I'm in the love camp, so go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds and I'll come back and show you more Nintendo 64 arcade games. Enjoy! It basically sounds like a cartoon come to life in the best way possible. This game is just charming. Now, if you don't like puzzle games, there's going to be nothing here in Koro Fever that's going to convince you that it is a genre you should start playing. But if you like games like this and you've never played it before, definitely check it out on the core. It is an insane ton of fun. Of course, because it's an arcade game, you can do 2-player. It's a really fun time to have with friends. And that's the great thing about the Nintendo 64 core. We don't just get the retail library, we get fan games, and we also get all of the Aleck 64 games. Now, I did not test every single Mahjong game, nor am I going to show you any Mahjong footage here because no one including me is interested in that, but it seems to be that pretty much all of the games run and function. But moving on to another game that's a ton of fun is going to be Tower and Shaft. A lot of the games on the Aleck 64 are quite simple, but in the simplicity is a lot of fun. This is just a basically endless screen that you need to scroll up or down on. Hold down one of the buttons and it's going to charge that meter. Release it when you want to jump, and depending on the power meter, you're going to go up onto the screen. There's going to be a ton of different obstacles you need to navigate around, and if you fall out of the bottom of the screen, you're going to take a death. The entire point of this game is to get to the top floor, and we're playing 70 floors right now. It's so simple to understand how this game works, but when you actually start getting further up on the tower here, it's going to become that much harder. It's one of those things that basically feels like an iOS phone game from like in the mid to late 2000s, but it's here on the Nintendo 64 and the Aleck 64 much earlier than that. And that's the fun thing about these games. You probably don't know they exist, you probably never played them before, but they're infinitely easy to pick up and play, and you might find something that is a ton of fun. Something like Tower and Shaft, you think you're going to play it for 5 minutes and all of a sudden you keep saying one more turn and an hour has gone by and you're trying to beat your high score. Classic arcade game fun. But it was really interesting that the Aleck 64 even existed in the first place, and the fact that Sega used them for such simple games, Star Soldier being the only game outside of these that really has any complexity to it. Pretty much all the other games on the system are going to be puzzle games or Mahjong games. I'm sure Nintendo basically licensed this hardware out to them for relatively cheaply, and they decided to put some games on to try to recoup their investment relatively quickly. But honestly, Tower and Shaft is still a lot of fun. It gets hard and it basically plays in some ways like Mr. Driller except in reverse. While in the next area when we go to Shaft is going to play exactly like Mr. Driller without the digging. Do be aware though that the difficulty in all of these games is going to be in test menus. You're not used to that for Nintendo 64, and if you don't get into arcade games, you're not going to know that the test menu exists whatsoever, but just go ahead and all the keys until you get it, change your options, and then go ahead and hit save. Music in this one, fun as well. Listen, and I'll be right back.
お行きなさい。
ああ、めんどくせえ。
Really fun soundtrack, and it's a very addicting game. Now moving on to 11-beat here, this is obviously, if you can't tell already, a soccer game, and for everyone that's not in the US like I am, a football game. And it actually is a lot of fun. It's super simple, easy to pick up and play, has some really fun graphics, and almost feels like the Mii's from the Nintendo Wii before that system actually ever existed. It's one of those things, if you like sports games, there's a lot to love here. If you're not too interested in soccer games, then honestly, don't try to play this because it's not doing anything that any other game you didn't like is. But it's another fun game running on the Aleck 64 hardware, which now is incorporated within the Nintendo 64 core. And that's because the Aleck 64 really didn't change anything about the Nintendo 64 hardware whatsoever. It uses cartridges, it has the same hardware, there's not any expanded specs. It is just set up to run in an arcade cabinet versus on your home TV stand back in the day with the yellow, white, and red RCA cables. But that's the great thing. I do have an Aleck 64 board in my closet, but now I think I'm probably going to sell it because I'm going to see absolutely no reason whatsoever to plug it in to play Tower and Shaft, because I do love collecting weird arcade hardware. I have one game and one game only for the Aleck 64, and now I can just turn on my MiSTer FPGA and play it immediately versus taking out my super gun, my board, my arcade stick, and everything else. But as we run around here in 11B, it is a super fun soccer game, and it does interesting things with the camera that are a little bit more lively than you're used to when you play a soccer game. And of course, like every arcade game, it's 2 players, so playing this with a friend is definitely going to be a lot more fun wrong, is I would say that the CPU is a little mindless. Although in the beginning of the capture, if you didn't notice, I ran towards my own goal, so apparently I'm a little mindless as well. But this is just another fun game. Now be aware again, the library of the Aleck 64 is not deep whatsoever. I think it has 11 games. I'm doing that by memory. Leave me a comment down below and tell me if I was wrong. And also tell me down below, did you know the Aleck 64 existed? And if so, have you ever played one in real life? Because I don't think this got any sort of distribution outside of Japan and Asia. I've never seen a cabinet in the US that was supposed to be here. And now moving on to the last game that everyone's going to ask about. Yes, Vivid Dolls does work on this core, and I'm only showing you like the first part of it. No judgments if it's your thing, but it's definitely not YouTube's thing, if you know what I mean. This is probably the most famous game for the Aleck 64. It's the one that basically headlines every single article when they talk about the fact that the Nintendo 64 actually had an arcade board. And that is because this is so unlike anything you would ever expect to show up on Nintendo 64 hardware, or any Nintendo hardware for that matter. I think it just is a fun little instance of, hey, they licensed the hardware, they probably didn't have any restrictions of what they could put on it, and I'm sure your imagination can fill in the blanks of what would be coming next. But that is the fun that you can have on the Nintendo 64 core with Aleck 64 games. There is an entire arcade board made based on this hardware, and all of the games seem to function totally fine on the current core. My favorite game definitely being Kuro Kuro Fever, the soccer game being a fun second, and honestly Star Soldier, while it's a ton of fun, you can also play it on the Nintendo 64, so that doesn't feel fair. Tower and Chef's going to drive you nuts, you're going to get into it, think it's not that complicated, and be there for hours. But the Aleck 64 was an arcade board, the ROMs run on a Nintendo 64, and that means they work on MiSTer FPGA. Sure that I'll see you guys next time, go play some Aleck. Bye bye.